Hi everyone, this is Yana, and today I'm going to show you how you can create an elegant card using dies from Spellbinders and papers from Graphic 45. So here's a card that we're going to be doing today. We're not going to make an identical card, however we are going to use the same dies. So the papers that I chose to use are from Graphic 45 Sweet Sentiments 8x8 pad. I have already pulled a few designs and you can see them here on my work surface. As for the dies, I have two corners from the Gold Corner Swan set that I'm going to use to create this fan type embellishment that you see there on the right side of the card. A few feathers from the Feathers set. They're also identical or similar dies in the Feathers on the Wind set and Peacock Feathers die sets from Spellbinders. Also a large butterfly from the Outrageous Butterfly set, as well as these labels from the Labels 29 set. And finally, the little negative pieces are from the Adorning Squares set. I'm not going to use the dies to cut the actual shapes, but I'm rather going to use the negative die cut pieces to embellish the corners of my paper. And I'll talk about these and similar dies later on my video. As for the pattern papers that I have selected, I plan to use the following designs and combine them together to create lots of dimension on my card. I'm going to start by die cutting all the elements out of craft cardstock. I usually like to use the same color and type of cardstock for both card base and for the die cut elements. But this time I was running low, so I had to use different but very similar kinds of cardstock to die cut my elements. So I'm going to cut a butterfly, two feathers, and two corners. I'm always using a piece of washi tape to hold my dies in place. You can substitute this with painter's tape or low-tech tape or a post-it note. And I'm also going to emboss my die cut pieces. These feathers look absolutely gorgeous when embossed. Embossing really adds lots of detail to them. You can emboss Spellbinders dies in just about any die cutting machine. You simply need to get a tan embossing mat to be able to do that. And Spellbinders has instructions as how to emboss using their dies and other machines on their website, so be sure to check that out. After my die cut pieces are ready, I'm going to move on to prepping layers for my card. I'm going to start by cutting out this card from the Sweet Sentiments 8x8 pad from Graphic 45. Now, I really like this 8x8 pad or format because the journaling cards there are smaller and they can be used as an accent on a card. If you use a 12x12 pad, journaling cards are going to be almost the size of an A2 card, which in some cases might be a bit too big. I like using both sizes, but for this project I prefer the 8x8 size. I'm also going to use a little sentiment from this sheet, and I'm going to cut both of these elements out using my scissors. I'm going to use my paper trimmer and cut this pattern paper to be used in both front and back of my card. I'm going to trim it to 4 by 5¼ inches, and by using this 8x8 format, I have just enough paper to do that, and some left over for some additional die cutting later. So I then added some zigzag stitching on my sewing machine to both of these pieces, and I'm going to use an extra piece of double-sided tape to secure that thread on the back. I like adding machine stitching to my cards, as I think it makes them look extra special and really handmade. I'm then going to use my tape runner and adhere these stitched papers to my card base, which is, by the way, an A2 top folding card. So I'm going to add one to the front and one to the back. I also like to lift edges of my paper to create some faux dimension on my projects. I do this by slightly bending the edges of the paper towards me with my fingers. I then die cut a label out of some white watercolor cardstock. I also cut one from the pattern paper that I had originally planned to use, but I didn't quite like it. I think the detail of the shape got lost in the busy design of the pattern, so I decided to use cardstock instead, or solid cardstock instead. Now, the reason I like to use watercolor cardstock is because the one that I'm using has some nice texture to it, and it's a little bit heavier cardstock than I regularly use. So therefore, when embossed, it provides a better and crisper detail. I'm going to use 2 of these label dies to create an embossed frame on my paper. In the end, it's not going to be very visible under all the layers, but I simply like adding embossing to my die cuts. So there I have a very nice and detailed double embossed label. I'm then going to start layering my pieces together and begin adhering them. I also found this absolutely stunning die cut laying on my table, and I also decided to use it on my card. This die cut was made using a die from Timeless Rectangle set. And I also used some watercolor cardstock to die cut it. So I'm going to use some foam squares to create dimension and adhere these pieces together. Now when I'm working with Spellbinders dies, I have a few rules. So rule number 1 is to alternate pattern papers and solid colored cardsticks for great results. Notice that that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm using a journaling card, or we can actually count this as pattern paper, and I'm adhering it to a label which is cut out of white cardstock. This is actually rather obvious if you look closely at most of my cards. The pattern papers are typically used for simple shapes like circles or ovals or a rectangle like we have here. And then a fancy die cut is created out of some solid colored cardstock. So after all of my layers are created and adhered together, it's time to start adding those embellishments. And by embellishments, I of course mean the die cut feathers, butterfly, and corners. I'm going to use multi-matte medium from Ranger to adhere all of these pieces to my card. It's a nice strong adhesive that dries matte. Before adhering, however, I'm going to add some dimension to my feathers by bending them and curling them with my fingers. And I'm also going to do the same thing with the butterfly. I want to make these pieces look a bit more realistic. As for the corners, I wanted to use them in a different way, other than just placing them in a corner of my card. So I cut 2 and adhere them together to create something like a fan-type object. So I'm going to stick them in between layers underneath that sentiment that I had previously cut out of the pattern paper. And I'm also going to use some foam squares for the sentiment. Now it's time to add those tiny negative pieces to the corners of the journaling card. I often look for dies in my stash that create small negative swirly elements, which can be used for cases like this. I also like to use the corners from the Gold Corner Swan set from Spellbinders, but sometimes they're just too big and it's better to use something smaller. And Spellbinders has really lots of dies that cut those nice small negative pieces that you can use for cards like this. You just really need to look closely at your dies. So since these pieces are so tiny, you can make them sticky right away by adding double-sided tape to the back of the paper before you cut it. Or you can use a sticker maker after you've cut them. Or like I'm doing here, you can go the old-fashioned way about this and you can just use plain old glue. Either way, these pieces are going to add a nice extra touch to your card. Finally, finish making your card by placing a few gems or pearls. They are sure to make your card sparkle. I hope you enjoyed this video. All supplies I used are listed below in the video description and on my blog for your convenience. Please be sure to click that like button, drop me a comment, and share this video with your crafty friends. And if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Thank you.